What happens when a powerful black CEO is denied her first-class meal, but chooses not to raise her voice? What if that single, quiet moment rewired an entire industry? This is the story of Celeste Morgan, a tech visionary, a first-class passenger, and the silent force behind one of the most powerful reckonings in luxury service culture. She didn't post, she didn't shout, she acted. And when she did, the world was forced to listen. Based on true events and real dialogue, this is not just a story. It's a mirror to how quiet discrimination operates and how strategic power dismantles it. Watch until the end, because the last line, it might just change how you see your next flight and yourself. They say luxury is a language only a few can speak fluently. But what if the most fluent speaker in the room is the one nobody listens to? Celeste Morgan sat in seat 1A, the first seat, the finest view, the symbol of success for anyone who's ever clawed their way to the top. The soft leather, the ambient glow, the whispers of vintage champagne and caviar. It was all there, everything that defined first class. But for Celeste, it wasn't just a seat. It was a battlefield. She wasn't a stranger to this world. As the founding CEO of Morgan Tech, a billion-dollar powerhouse reshaping the landscape of AI and cybersecurity, Celeste had dined with presidents, debated policy with senators, and signed deals that shifted the axis of power in global tech. Forbes named her one of the world's most influential women 3 years running. Time magazine called her the mind behind the digital firewall of the free world. And yet, despite all of that, she was invisible. Not because she lacked presence. No, Celeste was a vision, tall, poised, wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that whispered wealth, not shouted it. Her curly hair was neatly pinned in a low bun. Every detail about her was intentional, from the shine of her leather shoes to the slight gold band on her left ring finger. But still, the eyes that scanned the cabin rarely landed on her. If they did, they didn't linger. She had grown used to it. Not numb, just prepared. There's a difference. The flight she boarded, Stratus Air Flight 917, was supposed to be routine. A direct journey from New York to Geneva, where Celeste was scheduled to finalize a deal that would open Morgan Tech's first European headquarters. A $2.8 billion merger, the kind of deal men toast to with single malt scotch in private lounges. But for Celeste, it was never just about the deal. It was about what it meant: visibility, permanence, a place at the table, earned. She had pre-ordered her meal, lobster bisque and a prime steak with Chateau Margaux. Her tradition on every international flight, a small indulgence, but not for vanity. It was a declaration, a ritual that reminded her, I belong here. I built my way into this space, brick by brick, bite by bite. But when the flight attendant returned and offered a cold chicken sandwich instead, everything changed. It wasn't the sandwich that bothered her. It was the delivery. A smile that didn't reach the eyes. A shrug that reeked of condescension. And a tone, polite, but laced with something unmistakable. Dismissal. The kind of tone that said, you're lucky to even be here. In that moment in the heart of first class, Celeste didn't feel catered to. She felt erased. Others around her, all white, all men in tailored suits, were already sipping champagne. Their meals arrived in succession: caviar, hand-rolled sushi, molten chocolate soufflés. And none of them noticed her tray. Or maybe they did and chose not to see it. The insult was quiet, civilized, wrapped in professionalism. And yet it stung with the same heat as any slur ever could. But this wasn't the first time Celeste had been here. Not on this plane, but in this place. This moment where competence meets condescension, where success isn't enough to buy you dignity because someone decided you don't look like it. What those flight attendants didn't know, what no one in that cabin realized, was that Celeste Morgan was not just a passenger. She was the silent owner of the very skies they flew in. Stratus Air was a proud client of Morgan Tech. Its entire customer data system, its internal security, its AI-powered flight scheduling, coded, protected, and overseen by Celeste's own team. And so, while others laughed over wine, she tapped on her tablet. Quietly, methodically. That cold sandwich would become the turning point of an empire. Because when a black woman in seat 1A is told she doesn't belong, after spending her life building the world others simply ride through, something shifts. Something ancient. Something immovable. And in that shift, the truth is revealed. The most powerful revolutions don't begin with noise. They begin with silence. A silence like the one that fell over Stratus Flight 917. Before the storm. Stay with us. What happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about power, privilege, and what it really means to be seen. It began with a tray. Not just any tray, but one that should have carried elegance, attention, and above all, recognition. Instead, it held a cold chicken sandwich, a cracked paper napkin, and a plastic cup of lukewarm water. In a space that promised the world, what Celeste Morgan received was a message. And it wasn't subtle. The flight attendant's words were simple, almost robotic. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we've run out of premium meals." Delivered with the precision of a line practiced hundreds of times. But it wasn't the words that mattered. It was the way they were delivered. No eye contact, no apology, and certainly no effort. Celeste blinked slowly, absorbing it all. Her voice, calm and clear, cut through the polished quiet of first class. "I pre-ordered last week. There's an email confirmation, a booking reference, even text reminders from your system." The attendant, Becky, her name tag glinting under the overhead light, shrugged with an air of rehearsed indifference. Maybe the system wasn't updated. Happens all the time. And just like that, she turned her back and walked away. "No, let me check again." "No, I'll see what I can do." Not even the decency of a second glance. Becky didn't just serve a sandwich. She served a verdict. And the jury, seated all around Celeste in tailored blazers and polished cufflinks, stayed silent, unbothered, comfortable in their bubbles of white noise and wine refills. Celeste stared at the tray, at the wilted lettuce, at the sandwich whose soggy edges pressed into the cheap wrapping, not because she wanted to eat it, but because she needed to see it. She needed to remember the moment in its full, raw detail. The moment where luxury forgot its promise and revealed its bias. It wasn't the food. It never is. It was the principle. The double standard. The audacity to assume that the only black woman in first class would accept being treated like she didn't matter. But Celeste Morgan didn't do quiet submission. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. She scanned the cabin slowly. Behind her, 3 white men clinked their glasses, talking markets and mergers, oblivious or perhaps perfectly aware of the injustice in front of them. The names came to her in a flash. Radcliffe, Malcolm, Clayton. Not just passengers. Power. Brokers. One of them had once rejected her startup pitch, claiming she lacked executive maturity. Another had casually asked at a conference if diversity hires had to prove themselves more than once. They were used to overlooking her, and today it showed. No one offered to switch trays. No one questioned the crew. No one looked uncomfortable. Because to them, this wasn't unusual. It was expected. She was the anomaly, the glitch in their curated matrix. She sat back, straightened her posture, not out of pride, but to make space for the fire building inside her. This wasn't about embarrassment, it was about exposure. The kind of exposure that cracks open a system, that peels away the silk curtains and reveals who gets served and who gets sidelined when no one is watching. Celeste's tablet screen glowed softly beside her, but her mind was already 10 steps ahead. This wasn't a service failure, it was a systemic pattern. One she had seen before, disguised as oversight, hidden beneath phrases like, "We're doing our best," or "It's not personal." But this time, the oversight had a face, a name, a record she could pull in seconds. And, unlike those who chose silence, Celeste chose memory. She recalled the first time she had been mistaken for an intern in her own boardroom. The moment a colleague handed her a coffee order instead of a business proposal. She remembered how she turned that moment into a $15 million contract with a single sentence. "I'll bring your coffee if you'll sit down and let me walk you through the algorithm that's about to replace your security division." She never had to ask twice again, and she wouldn't now. That cold sandwich wasn't just lunch, it was evidence. A symbol of what happens when people believe status comes in one color. Celeste didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. But beneath her calm, a decision had been made. The kind of decision that doesn't announce itself, but arrives like a thunderclap in a boardroom hours later. Because when the system believes you'll stay quiet, it never sees the audit coming. She picked up her phone. Her fingers moved slowly, but with purpose. It was time. Time to make the system remember who was really sitting in seat 1A. The clink of glass, the hum of conversation, and the muted glow of overhead lights created the illusion of serenity. But beneath it, a quiet storm was beginning to form. Celeste sat still, but inside, her thoughts spun with the precision of a military-grade algorithm. The incident, though barely 5 minutes old, had already been stored, categorized, and analyzed by the sharpest mind in global tech leadership. She wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier to dismiss. No, what lived in her chest now was something far more dangerous. Clarity. When Becky walked away, leaving that sad tray on the fold-down table, she didn't just walk off with Celeste's meal. She walked off with every excuse the system had used to cover its bias. Celeste had seen it before. The smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the formal tone that's too formal, the service that's somehow always just short of what others receive. And the worst part? It's always deniable, always just one step below provable. She could already hear the PR team's voice in her head. "We're sorry for the misunderstanding. It wasn't personal. Perhaps a system glitch." But she knew better. Because personal wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was served cold, in economy-grade packaging, to a first-class mind. And the crew? They played their parts flawlessly. Daniel, the male attendant, addressed the men around her with names, handshakes, and effortless warmth. "Mr. Radcliffe, welcome back. Mr. Malcolm, your usual wine?" To Celeste, not even a glance. She was the guest, a faceless seat number in their luxury equation. The irony was sharp enough to taste. Celeste Morgan, the very architect of the airline's cyber infrastructure, was now being ignored by the people who unknowingly depended on her for their paychecks. As the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, so did her resolve. Higher, clearer, and sharper. She took a breath, closed her eyes. And when she opened them again, she didn't see tray tables and champagne. She saw data points. She saw performance logs, internal complaints, audit trails, behavioral reports, all of which she could summon in minutes. Because she didn't just sit in seat 1A. She sat at the helm of one of the most powerful intelligence engines in corporate aviation, and Stratus Air was inside it. She tapped on her screen, not on her email, on her company's secure app. The one used to flag internal irregularities among top-tier partners. Initiate audit marker. Flight 917. Cabin crew ID. STA9035. Behavior flag. Discrepant service tier response. Confirm witness. Timestamp 17:23 GMT. The response was instant. Audit protocol initiated. Command layer escalation pending. Please advise if legal flag is required. She didn't respond. Not yet. This was a warning shot, one the system wouldn't feel, until it was too late. She looked up again. Becky was laughing with a passenger 2 rows back, a light hand on his shoulder, a refill without request. The choreography of curated charm. But Celeste saw it for what it was. Selective service. Performed professionalism. And beneath it all, an unspoken algorithm of exclusion. There was a time when Celeste might have let it slide, might have reasoned her way out of confrontation. She had been taught, like so many others who looked like her, that silence was strength, that grace was survival. But not today, because silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's complicity. She turned to her smartwatch and tapped again, her fingers fluid, deliberate. Message: Aaliyah Grant. Initiate emergency log archive. Access crew data via Stratus API. Begin discrepancy mapping. Keywords: biased behavior, service gap, non-standard treatment. On the other side of the ocean, systems began to whir. Celeste didn't need to yell. She didn't need to protest. She just needed the system to see what it had refused to see for years. And with every keystroke, that blindfold was being peeled away. Because this wasn't about soup. It was about respect. And respect, once denied, doesn't ask twice. From the outside, Celeste looked perfectly composed. But inside, she was tracing a pattern she had seen all her life. Discrimination in luxury spaces never screamed, it whispered. And today, that whisper had reached her tray table. She remembered being 26, walking into her first pitch meeting in Silicon Valley, only to be asked if she was there to shadow someone. At 33, when she walked into the boardroom of Sterling Capital, a senior partner mistook her for catering. She remembered how he asked her to bring coffee, and how she replied, "Only if you agree to let me present the $15 million cybersecurity plan I built." That silence afterward? That was the sound of power being recalibrated. But the recalibration never seemed to last, because for every victory there was another assumption, another room she had to fight her way into. And even when she got inside, the rope around her presence, thin, invisible, was always there. The invisible rope. It pulled at her confidence subtly, questioned her expertise without saying a word, tightened around her success, not to choke, but to remind her she was still an outlier. And today it pulled again, not with a noose but with a napkin-wrapped insult and a dismissive shrug. That was the danger of modern bias. It was refined. No one yelled, no one called her out of her, but no one called her by her name either. Selective service, unacknowledged brilliance, muted disrespect, packaged with a smile. As the plane coasted through the clouds, Celeste tapped into a different kind of altitude, her memory. Every instance when a system failed her, not by breaking, but by functioning exactly as it was designed. For someone else, she recalled the data. Diversity stats that never matched reality. Performance reviews of Black employees always marked with lacks executive presence. CEOs who promised inclusion but practiced convenience. And as she recalled, she connected. This flight wasn't an exception. It was the rule playing out, only. This time the rule had picked the wrong seat to test itself against. Seat 1A wasn't just occupied, it was recording. Celeste looked to her left. Radcliffe and Malcolm were laughing about crypto. Behind them, Clayton was sipping his third glass of champagne. None of them noticed her. Or maybe they did, and chose not to. She scanned the crew list on her tablet, cross-referenced internal data. On service reviews, Becky's name popped up. Rebecca Ann Whitmore, cabin crew ID, STA9035. 2 prior guest complaints for unequal service experience. A flag from HR that was never followed up. No formal action, a system that notices everything, except what it doesn't want to see. She copied the complaint, records into a secure Morgantech channel, and added notes under a new tag. Behavioral pattern. Service class discrepancy. Then she tapped again. Initiate flag tier 3. Culture deviation. Behavior metrics in violation. Auto forward to partner oversight AI. Begin temporal tracking. She had designed the AI tool herself, years ago, for moments just like this. Not for revenge, but for reckoning. The rope might be invisible to the, but data would trace its every knot. For the rest of the flight, Celeste remained still. But her silence was no longer passive. It was strategic. She was building a case, not in court, but in code. Every data point, every camera timestamp, every delay in service. This wasn't just about Becky anymore. It was about the cultural DNA of an airline that claimed elegance but practiced exclusion. She wasn't angry. She was ready, because the system had failed her, one too many times, and this time she was going to make it answer for it. Celeste Morgan knew timing was everything. In boardrooms, timing could land or lose a deal. In tech rollouts, the right second could mean billions saved or lost. And here, in the quiet tension of first class at 37,000 feet, timing would decide how an empire responded to its own blind spots. She didn't flinch, didn't rattle the tray or slam the screen. Celeste simply breathed, deep, measured, like a warrior meditating before the strike. Then her hand moved, not to the meal, not to ring the flight attendant again. To her watch, a tap, a biometric scan, a 3-code sequence, a secure portal opened. Command layer, internal escalation. Flight 917, activate phase 1. Full behavioral log on cabin crew ID STA9035. Sync with Morgan Tech oversight. Scrub timestamp 1723 GMT. It wasn't a threat. It was a procedure, already pre-coded by her years ago, embedded in her company's private oversight architecture. Created not for punishment, but for protection. Because people like her didn't always have the luxury of being believed. Now, they didn't have to be. She had built the system to remember for her. Across the ocean in Manhattan, lights blinked in the data centers of Morgan Tech. A soft hum of CPUs coming alive. Code rippled through firewalls and into secure AI streams. Aaliyah Grant, Celeste's executive assistant and former cybersecurity analyst, received the ping on her private console. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. Within minutes, Aaliyah launched the emergency oversight protocol. Behavioral pattern request. Flight 917. Crossref, crew logs, bias index engagement active. Meanwhile, on the plane, Celeste watched the clouds drift by her window. To anyone else, she was just gazing at the sky. But inside, she was charting the downfall of a legacy problem. This was how change began. Not with rage, but with readiness. Because Celeste wasn't just reacting. She was orchestrating. She knew the airline wouldn't collapse in a day. But she also knew systems like these, polished, praised, and layered in PR, often fell hardest when confronted with data, not opinion. Not feelings. Cold, undeniable data. That's what she was collecting now. She reviewed the onboard Wi-Fi access logs, checked time-stamped interactions, isolated moments where Becky skipped her, compared that with passenger logs from past flights. Each thread spun into a larger web. She wasn't a passenger anymore. She was a strategist inside the belly of the machine. In silence, she constructed a case built not on assumptions, but precision. And somewhere behind her, Becky Whitmore laughed again. Celeste heard it, and she smiled, barely. Because timing, as always, was everything. She wasn't here to shame. She was here to show. Show a culture that had let Becky exist for years. Show a company that its luxury veneer was built on selective service. And show every silent observer in that cabin that silence doesn't protect injustice. It delays accountability. Celeste took another breath. Calm, quiet, and pressed send. Across the Atlantic, Aaliyah received the final go. Initiate secondary log pull. Partner system Stratus Air. Request all complaint records, crew reassignment notes, and VIP service ratings. Priority. 1A. Within the next hour, the entire flight. Log would be flagged for internal audit. Cabin camera footage would be backed up. Crew interactions tagged and stored. All tied to one anomaly. A Diamond Plus VIP passenger in seat 1A receiving a downgraded meal. And zero name acknowledgement. And the system would finally be forced to look at itself. Not because Celeste asked, but because she built it to. The revolution didn't begin with shouting. It began with a whisper in code. And by the time the plane landed, a decision made in the quiet stillness of seat 1A would already be rewriting the policy manuals of an entire industry. In the cabin of Flight 917, time moved as it always did. Quietly, politely, efficiently. But behind the veil of courtesy, something irreversible had already begun. Becky Whitmore didn't know she had been flagged. Her name, her actions, Her patterns of service were now flowing through the neural network of Morgan Tech's oversight division. A quiet audit was underway, and every polite sneer she'd ever given was now data. She passed Celeste's row again with a practiced smile. Her tray balanced with hot towels for the gentleman 2 seats behind. She didn't glance down at seat 1A, didn't ask if Celeste needed anything. In her mind, the incident was over. But in the code, it had just begun. Thousands of miles away, in a dim-lit operations room on the 42nd floor of Morgan Tech HQ, Aaliyah Grant was locked in. 3 displays ran simultaneously. Historical complaint logs from Stratus Air, passenger satisfaction rankings, and flagged verbal interactions pulled from onboard audio archives. The AI was already painting a picture. Bias index, 84.6%. Disproportionate prioritization of male white passengers. Repeated delay in responding to call requests from minority passengers. Low verbal engagement with VIP customers who did not meet Becky's internal preferred profile. Aaliyah stared at the results. "She's done this before," she muttered. She tapped a command. Aggregate all flight data involving STA9035. Filter by race, gender, service time discrepancy, passenger satisfaction. Export anomaly report. She watched as the screen populated. A pattern emerged. One so clear it didn't need interpretation. It needed action. Back on the plane, Celeste remained composed. She noticed Daniel, the male attendant, hesitate. His eyes flicked toward her, uncertain. Maybe he had sensed something shift in the air. Maybe he knew instinctively that Celeste was no ordinary traveler. She looked up at him. "I have a question," she said softly. He leaned in. "Yes, ma'am. If a passenger pre-orders their meal and confirms it twice, who decides that it isn't served?" Daniel blinked. "It depends. Sometimes the system..." Celeste raised a brow. "Does the system also decide who's greeted by name?" He didn't answer. The silence was louder than any excuse. "Thank you," she said, her voice razor-sharp in its calm. He walked away, quickened steps betraying the pressure. The clock ticked. Celeste's smartwatch buzzed lightly. Initial audit report ready. 3. Past incidents flagged. 1 crew transfer request previously denied. Confirmation pending from legal team. Recommend escalation to partner compliance. She reviewed the summary. February 2022. Wine denied to a black female executive. August 2023. Caviar service skipped for 2 South Asian diplomats. November 2023. Internal report noted selective hospitality, but no formal action taken. It wasn't coincidence. It was culture. Celeste's eyes drifted to the front of the plane, where the Stratus Air logo shimmered under cabin lights. Beneath that shimmer was a rot, polished over but persistent, and she had decided to cleanse it. One more tap. Submit internal memo to CEO Charles Edmonds. Mark. Red flag. Service ethics risk. Attach flight log. Attach behavioral profile. CC legal and diversity officers. She didn't need to follow up, she knew Charles. They had partnered on cyber resilience programs before. He respected data, and he respected her more. This wasn't just a complaint, it was an indictment, and when Flight 917 landed in Geneva, the welcome party would not be the only thing waiting. On the tarmac, HR, legal, ethics. Becky had no idea she'd already lost the sky beneath her feet, because when Celeste Morgan tapped send, it wasn't a message, it was a reckoning. The turbulence wasn't in the air, it was in the system. 12 minutes after Celeste Morgan sent her final escalation, the network of red flags she triggered began to unfold with brutal precision. Every node in the system that touched Becky, Whitmore's name flickered into scrutiny. At Stratus Air HQ in Geneva, a discreet ping hit the inbox of Charles Edmonds, CEO. The subject line was impossible to miss. Urgent, Flight 917, ethical risk assessment, triggered, CHAS, VIP involved. He opened the attachment and froze. There were no exaggerated words, no dramatics, just a clean summary. Behavioral deviation detected across multiple flights. Correlated service gaps based on race and gender. High-profile passenger, Morgan Celeste. VIP tier, Diamond Plus. Denied standard meal service. Suggest immediate review upon landing. Charles didn't call his assistant. He called legal. Pull internal protocol for in-flight discrimination response. Assemble HR and crisis team at Gate 6A. Make sure security footage is secured the moment the cabin door opens. Meanwhile, in the cabin of Flight 917, laughter continued. Radcliffe and Malcolm were toasting their next investment deal. Becky made her rounds, topping off glasses with mechanical grace. And yet every gesture she made now was being tracked. Every smile, every skipped row, every second she spent lingering by certain passengers. Celeste had enabled passive surveillance, tech through a partner firm. It didn't record video. It measured behavior, service timing, eye contact frequency, voice tone analysis, gesture analysis. By the time Becky offered a second dessert to Mr. Clayton, without even glancing toward 1A, the AI calculated a behavioral deviation index of 91.3%. It didn't scream racism. It showed patterns, and patterns don't lie. Celeste checked the dashboard on her smartwatch again. A small notification blinked. Behavioral risk summary. Uploaded to Stratus Compliance Board. PDF report plus audio logs confirmed. She exhaled, not from stress but from certainty. Becky didn't know it, but her story was already being rewritten by her own choices. Another ding. This one came from Aaliyah. Backup secured. All logs matched. Your profile audit was used. As control sample. Variance too high to ignore. Stratus has issued pre-landing risk mitigation alert. You'll be met by execs. Celeste simply nodded. She looked outside the window, watching as dusk painted the sky in a gradient of fire and indigo. She wasn't angry. She was aligned. When the seatbelt sign turned on, the cabin shifted into landing mode. Passengers packed away their laptops. Crew began their final checks. But beneath it all, the quiet hum of consequence was growing louder. Daniel passed by once more. This time his face lacked its earlier confidence. He paused. I just wanted to say, if there was anything missed. We're very sorry, ma'am. Celeste tilted her head. Thank you, she said. Not cold, not kind, just final. He didn't linger. In the cockpit, the pilot announced arrival in Geneva. The landing gear deployed with a soft thud, but somewhere beyond the clouds, an organizational storm had already touched down. By the time wheels kissed runway, 3 departments inside Stratus were fully engaged, and the woman in seat 1A, she hadn't raised her voice, hadn't called for a manager, hadn't posted a single thing online. She simply moved with purpose, because when you know your worth and you build your own system, you don't need revenge. You just need a record, and hers was flawless. The wheels touched the Geneva runway with a muted screech, but for Celeste Morgan, it might as well have been a war drum. She didn't move right away. She simply opened her eyes. Around her, the cabin stirred with the usual post-landing rituals. Seatbelts clicked open, laptops zipped away, conversations resumed. It was a picture of normalcy. But what no one realized was that nothing about this landing was normal, because outside, beyond the cabin doors, a different kind of welcome committee was assembling. At Gate 6A, 2 executives from Stratus Air's European leadership team waited in crisp, dark suits. Alongside them stood a legal advisor, her expression sharp, and a senior member of human resources holding a sealed ethics report. They had read the data, they had seen the footage, and they knew this wasn't just an internal issue. It was a cultural fault line, cracking under the weight of quiet decisions. Celeste unbuckled her seatbelt, fluid and unhurried. She reached up, retrieved her leather bag from the overhead bin, and straightened her blazer with the same precision she used in every contract negotiation. No one noticed her yet. Or rather, they still didn't see her, but they would. She stepped to the aisle, composed, powerful, unbothered. Her heels clicked softly against the carpet, but each step echoed with meaning. Behind her, Daniel avoided eye contact. Becky was smiling as if nothing had happened, still standing in her delusion of untouchability. Celeste didn't look back. As she exited the cabin, she was greeted not with a handshake, but with a bow of acknowledgement. Ms. Morgan, the executive, said, "We sincerely apologize for—" Celeste raised a hand gently. "No need," she said. "This is just the beginning." She walked past them, not waiting for their reaction. But behind her, their faces shifted, sobered. They knew. This wasn't a complaint, this was a statement. Back inside the aircraft, the cabin crew began their disembarkation process. As they headed toward the rear exit, Becky laughed at something. One of the male passengers had said, still unaware, but just as she reached the terminal corridor, she saw them. 3 individuals in black suits, Stratus badges, serious expressions. One of them raised a tablet. "Crew of Flight 917, please proceed to Emergency Briefing Room 2. The laughter died in Becky's throat. Daniel looked to her, confused. "What's going on?" No one answered. The walk down the corridor felt longer than any international route. The confidence Becky wore like perfume began to dissolve. Every step tightened her chest. Meanwhile, Celeste was already in a sleek black car, heading toward her hotel. Her phone buzzed. Message from Aaliyah. "Debrief. Complete. Whitmore suspended pending review. Formal statement from CEO pending. Will forward." Celeste didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply looked out the window, watching the Swiss skyline blur past. In her mind, this wasn't justice. It was accountability finally arriving in a language the system could understand. Structure, proof, and the consequences of its own indifference. The ground had shifted, and for the first time in a long time it shifted towards someone like her. In the bright, sterile hallway outside Emergency Briefing Room 2, time stood still. Becky Whitmore stood rigid, her posture a fragile performance of confidence that had long begun to crack. To her left, Daniel Clean stared at the floor, fidgeting, with the corner of his boarding pass like it might somehow open a door to safety. The HR representative called her name first. Rebecca Whitmore. The door opened and she stepped inside. The air was cool, too quiet. A long table sat at the center of the room, flanked by 3 figures: a senior HR investigator, a legal officer, and a representative from Stratus's Ethics Compliance Office. "Please sit." She did. What followed was not an interrogation. It was a mirror. They began with the service timeline. "Ms. Whitmore, can you explain why passenger 1A, VIP designation, meal pre-ordered and confirmed, was denied her premium meal?" Becky blinked. "There must have been a system glitch. We've had those before." The legal officer tapped a tablet. "The system shows full confirmation. It also logs your acknowledgement at check-in and meal prep execution 5 hours prior to departure. 5 premium meals were on board. All were served, except 1. Becky hesitated. Maybe 1 was miscounted. The HR lead didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Ms. Whitmore, the footage shows you personally placing the last tray with lobster and steak before seats 1C and 1D, then returning to 1A with a cold sandwich and water. No explanation. No attempt to check inventory. No offer of apology." Becky's lips parted, but nothing came. They showed her the audio logs, a clipped tone, an empty apology, dismissive pauses, no name usage. Then came the pattern. 3 years worth of incident summaries, small isolated service issues involving non-white passengers. On paper, nothing egregious. In data form, a behavioral deviation so wide it couldn't be ignored. "Ms. Whitmore," said the ethics officer gently, "we're not here because of one mistake. We're here because of a culture you've helped reinforce. One smile, one shrug, one skipped step at a time." In another room, Daniel was being asked the same thing. Why didn't he intervene? Why didn't he acknowledge Celeste by name when he had greeted 3 white male passengers moments before? Why didn't he speak up? His answers were softer, less defensive, but no less empty. "I didn't think it was my place." "That's exactly the problem," the HR lead replied. Outside, The room Celeste's documentation was now policy evidence. The report submitted was being dissected by a full compliance team. The AI-based behavior mapping, once a tech demo offered in collaboration, had now become the foundation of a live case study. It wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. The reckoning wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It sat in printed pages, video stills, and data dashboards. It sat in the shifting expressions of those used to getting away with silent bias. It sat in the room like gravity. One floor above, the executive team gathered for an emergency meeting. The agenda was short. Resolve Flight 917. Prevent it from happening again. In the middle of the table sat a simple printed email from Celeste. Morgan subject, Seat 1A. Systemic misalignment. No apology requested. Only reform. Becky was escorted out 32 minutes after she entered. Her badge deactivated. Her schedule suspended. Her assumptions shattered. And Celeste? She hadn't raised her voice once, but somehow she'd made the entire system listen. While Stratus Air scrambled to contain the internal fire, Celeste Morgan sat in silence on the 21st floor of her Geneva hotel. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing the still surface of Lake Geneva beneath the morning sun. But her mind wasn't still. It was calculating. She had spoken no words in public, no press releases, no interviews. Yet the tremors had already reached 3 continents, because Celeste didn't need a mic. She had momentum. Her inbox lit up with requests. Journalists from The Guardian, Forbes, and even CNN asking for statements. Her assistant Aliyah filtered through them silently, knowing her boss's answer before Celeste even spoke. Not yet. This wasn't about press. This was about pressure. On her desk sat a single-page summary, Stratus Air's preliminary investigation report, hand-delivered by their European Division VP that morning. On it, 4 crew members were marked for suspension. Pending full review, a recommendation for policy overhaul had been signed off by the Internal Ethics Board. But that wasn't enough. A culture doesn't change with a suspension. A culture changes when someone rewrites the rules. And that's what Celeste intended to do. She stood, paced to the window, and tapped her watch. A secure line opened. Aliyah. Draft an advisory proposal. Title it, Redefining Luxury, a Cultural Blueprint. On it, her assistant replied. Celeste continued, her voice calm. Deliberate. Include 3 pillars. 1. Unconscious bias training for all international crew. 2. Data-driven service tracking on every premium flight. 3. Onboard behavior AI. Voluntary at first. Mandatory within 6 months. Add a partner clause? Aliyah asked. Absolutely. If Stratus wants our tech, they get our terms. Click. Just like that, a new era was born. Not with a viral video. Not with a televised meltdown. With a quiet voice and a louder idea. Later that afternoon, Stratus Air executives invited Celeste to a closed-door roundtable at HQ. No media, no legal counsel, just the people who had allowed a broken system to flourish under a polished brand. Celeste arrived wearing ivory. No logos, no makeup, just presence. When the CEO of Stratus stood to offer his apology, she raised a hand again. Don't apologize, she said. Learn. Then she placed the printed proposal on the table. Train your people, track your service, tell your truth. Not through slogans, through change. There was no applause, just silence. And for once, the silence didn't diminish her. It honored her. After the meeting, the CEO stood and extended his hand. We'd like to bring you on board as a strategic advisor to help lead this transformation. Celeste didn't smile. She simply nodded. And that nod would soon ripple into policy reform across 5 global regions. A white paper co-authored with Morgan Tech's Ethics Division and a viral leadership series titled Seat 1A, Who Gets Seen? None of it required a press tour. None of it needed rage. Just resolve. Celeste returned to her hotel late that evening. Aliyah had sent the final policy blueprint. The Stratus board had already signed Phase 1. She closed her laptop and stepped onto the balcony. Below, Geneva glowed. Behind her, a cold sandwich lay untouched in a hotel room bin. But its message still burned bright. The smallest slight can awaken the greatest shift. And when that shift begins in silence, it can't be silenced back. It started with one email. Then came the boardroom silence. Then came the whisper. And then, the wave. Within 48 hours of Celeste Morgan's policy blueprint hitting Stratus Air's servers, the impact had begun to swell far beyond airline corridors. Single internal memo was leaked, not by Celeste, but by someone within the company who had witnessed her proposal in that meeting. It contained her exact words: train your people, track your service, tell your truth. It was meant for executives, but the internet found it, and the internet does not forget. Within hours, hashtags flooded timelines. Seat 1A, luxury for all, who gets seen LinkedIn posts. Twitter threads and Instagram stories exploded with testimonials. From hotel workers, flight attendants, passengers of color, business travelers who had spent years being overlooked, even when seated in front row seats. One post stood out. A black woman holding up her own uneaten cold sandwich on a flight from Dubai, captioned, "This was me 2 months ago. I didn't say anything, but today I will." Shark Seatway. The post went viral, 10 million views, 1 million shares. Thousands of others followed. Soon business schools added Celeste Morgan's name to their case studies, not because she exposed a scandal, but because she exposed a truth too many had lived with for too long. Harvard published a short essay titled "The Power of Quiet Accountability." Fortune ran a headline, "The Woman Who Changed First Class." But Celeste still hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. She was already being heard. Back at Morgan Tech HQ, Aaliyah monitored the surge in real time. One internal Slack message from a junior designer summed it up. She made silence louder than outrage. Even airlines not affiliated with Stratus began reevaluating their luxury service guidelines. Several hospitality chains reached out requesting access to Morgan Tech's upcoming behavioral AI for bias monitoring. But this wasn't about software, it was about soul, and Celeste knew it. She finally issued her first public statement. 3 sentences posted quietly on Morgan Tech's company site. "This isn't about me. This is about what's been normal for too long. If Seat 1A can make room for everyone, maybe the system can too." That was it. No signature, no logo, no headshot, just words. But the world listened. On day 5, Stratus Air announced the formal launch of the Seat 1A initiative, a 6-part reform plan crafted with Celeste Morgan and enforced across every international route. Mandatory cultural awareness training, anonymous feedback portals, service interaction audits by AI, VIP tracking transparency, customer dignity policies, quarterly ethics reporting. It was unprecedented, and it was just the beginning. Because once the story reached government transportation, agencies, advocacy groups, and global corporations with their own biases hidden beneath corporate polish, the question was no longer, what happened to Celeste? The question became, how often has this happened to someone without her power? The Seat 1A effect wasn't a trend, it was a mirror, and for the first time the world wasn't just glancing into it, it was forced to stare. 3 months had passed. The story had cooled in headlines, but its heat still pulsed beneath the surface, like embers waiting to ignite something deeper. Stratus Air had completed its first round of reforms. Their quarterly report highlighted drops in anonymous service complaints. Passenger satisfaction in first class rose 14%. But no chart could capture what truly shifted, because Seat 1A was no longer just a designation. It had become a declaration. In a quiet conference room in Geneva, Celeste sat across from 3 young women, all black, all in the early stages of their careers in tech, aviation, and policy. They didn't ask for advice. They asked how to remain silent and still be powerful. Celeste leaned forward, her voice calm. "I wasn't silent," she said. I was strategic. The youngest among them asked, "Do you ever wish you made a scene?" Celeste smiled, not dismissively but knowingly. Scenes fade. Systems remember. Outside, the lake shimmered. Inside, the conversation continued. At Tati, a nearby airport, a new plaque had been quietly installed on a first-class bulkhead, Seat 1A, reserved for change, in honor of those who dare to see what others overlook. It wasn't marketing. It was memory. Celeste never asked for it. She didn't need to, because sometimes the world changes not when we demand space, but when we redefine who deserves it. She flew again, weeks later, to Johannesburg. Same airline, new crew. She boarded late. Her name wasn't announced. But when she reached Seat 1A, the attendant said softly, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Morgan. We've been expecting you." No spotlight, no applause, just recognition. And perhaps that was the real legacy of Seat 1A. Not that it made noise, but that it made space. Space for policy, space for memory, space for dignity, and above all, space for others to finally say, "I don't need to shout, I just need to be seen." As the flight ascended into the open sky, Celeste closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you've turned a cold sandwich into a cultural shift. Seat 1A had spoken, and the world would never fly the same way again. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice in the room that creates change. It's the one that knows when to move, when to document, and when to simply say, "I understand now." Celeste Morgan didn't overthrow the system by protesting in the aisle. She rewrote it from her seat, not because she wanted revenge, but because she knew others who looked like her might never have the chance to speak. Seat 1A is now a symbol for those who were once invisible. A reminder for corporations that every gesture counts, and a call to action for each of us. Are we truly seeing people, or are we just serving appearances? If this story moved you, share your voice below. Like it if it made you feel something. Share it if you believe silence shouldn't be the cost of dignity, because sometimes the most powerful revolution begins with a cold sandwich and a seat no one was supposed to notice.